us. It's a pleasure to have you on the program, as always. Now, as China is set to host the 2026 APEC Summit, debate has sparked over the participation of Taiwan. The US State Department has issued a statement saying that Taiwan must be allowed equal participation in the summit. Earlier, Taipei had complained that Beijing had imposed several conditions on its attendance. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation is one of the few international bodies where both China and Taiwan are members. And the Chinese Foreign Ministry has responded and stated that Taiwan's participation in APEC activities must comply with the One China principle. A US State Department official said that Taiwan's participation should be on an equal footing, consistent with the guidelines and rules established by the grouping. In the past, Beijing hosted the APEC summits in 2001 and 2014. The 2014 summit was attended by Taiwan when relations were better between China and the self-governed island. However, there was no participation from Taiwan in 2001. It is significant to see how the situation evolves as tensions continue to rise in the Taiwan Strait. Now joining us to discuss this is Ross Feingold. He is a political analyst and he joins us from the Taiwanese capital of Taipei. Ross, it's always a pleasure to talk to you here on the program. Ross, of course, Washington says Taiwan must have equal participation in the upcoming APEC summit next year. How does this statement change the tone of cross-strait diplomacy, if at all?
I think the second part of your question is the key issue here. The if at all part, does it really have any substantive impact on where things stand? The government in China is not talking to the government in Taiwan. That's been the situation since 2016 because each side has very different conceptions of what the relationship between China and Taiwan should be. That's not going to change. So the key issue for the APEC meeting, which is still a year away, is who does Taiwan propose to send as its representative? Because part of the agreement that allowed Taiwan to be a member of APEC and to be an equal member of APEC along with the other members is that Taiwan's leader, the president, does not attend. So so we talk about Taiwan being an equal member of APEC, but the starting point is actually unequal because its leader, by agreement, does not attend. They send some representative. Now, the issue is, and put aside all this talk over the past few hours, the Taiwan government saying that concerns about the security of the delegation. Frankly, I think it's really unlikely China would kidnap the delegation from Taiwan. But really, the key issue is going to be who does Taiwan propose to send as its representative, and will China be agreeable, or will they object and say that person is too political? Can you find somebody who's less political? And the Taiwan government might say, no, it's up to us who we get to select to be our representative at APEC. So there is this threshold issue of who will represent Taiwan, and that's before you get into any other issues.
Yes, and Ross, of course, we saw no participation from Taiwan in 2001. We did in 2014. However, Beijing said that Taiwan's participation must comply with the One China principle if Taiwan was to attend. What does that entail?
Yeah, that's really interesting because we don't know what exactly China wants in that regard. I mean, obviously, the Taiwan representative can't come to APEC and say, I'm there to campaign for the recognition of Taiwan independence. That's a non-starter. But is China asking the Taiwan government to make some kind of statement about supporting a one China principle? Chances are no, and the Taiwan government wouldn't do that anyway. But I think what China is saying is in the weeks or months preceding APEC, if you're going to be talking about Taiwan independence or separate identity and things like that, then it's going to make it very difficult for China to be agreeable to whoever Taiwan proposes to be the representative. So I think generally China's position is unchanged insofar as that they have their red lines with regard to actions or statements by the Taiwan government as to Taiwan's status, but ultimately it comes down to what Taiwan government does say or do in the period preceding the APEC meeting, including who Taiwan proposes to send as its representative.
Yes, Ross Feingold, do stay with us as we have further news coming out of the region, of course. And there are reports that during last week's meeting in South Korea between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping, President Trump raised the issue of Jimmy Lai with the Chinese leader. However, the same reports say that no specific deal was discussed for the release of the 77-year-old media tycoon who faces trial on national security charges. It is also being reported that President Trump suggested to President Xi that Lai's release would be good for US-China relations and for China's image as well. However, there has been no official confirmation from the White House regarding the issue being raised by President Trump during the meeting. Jimmy Lai has been facing national security charges in China for conspiracy to collude with foreign powers. He was arrested in December of 2020 and has been in detention ever since. It is significant as President Trump, before departing for his Asia trip, has stated that he would raise the issue of Jimmy Lai with President Xi. And so we have Ross Feingold once again with us. Ross, why would this be an issue that Donald Trump would raise in this crucial talks between President Xi and, of course, President Trump?
We have to keep in mind that the protests in Hong Kong occurred in 2019 during the first Trump administration, and the U.S. government, along with other governments such as the U.K., responded in the months and period after that, such as putting sanctions on Chinese and Hong Kong government officials, putting in place laws and regulations to welcome people from Hong Kong to relocate. So there is this history of the Trump administration following closely developments in Hong Kong. And subsequently, Lai's family and supporters have continued to advocate for him in Washington, in London, and other capitals around the world. So it's an issue that foreign governments are aware of. And Lai has excellent relationships, or his family, with the Trump administration. And it's something that they have invested in over the past few years. So they've certainly had outreach to the White House, and that's why the White House is aware of this issue. There are reports that White House personnel have told people in the period after the meeting that Trump did in fact raise this issue, even though Trump hasn't personally spoken about this. But even if it wasn't raised in the bilateral meeting between Xi Jinping and President Trump, certainly the Trump administration is raising this with the Chinese government whenever they do interact. However, I think the answer from the Chinese government is going to be to say that Hong Kong still has an independent judicial system and we can't interfere. Now, that doesn't mean that Jimmy Lai won't be freed in the future, but chances are that the Chinese government's view is that the judicial process still has to play itself out.
Yes, and Ross, what more can you tell us about Jimmy Lai's arrest, just briefly, and what he's accused of? Of course, he's been detained since 2020 for conspiracy to collude with foreign powers. Is there credibility behind this?
Well, the fact is, during that period of protest in 2019, Jimmy Lai and people working with him did interact with foreign governments and think tanks, foreign media, to talk about the situation in Hong Kong. And they did discuss things such as sanctions on Hong Kong and Chinese government officials. And now the law in Hong Kong says what you did was illegal. Now, in other countries, we would say that's a very normal thing for a civil society or opposition politicians to do, is to interact with governments around the world and say, this is what's going on in our country, or in the case of Hong Kong, in the special administrative region of Hong Kong. So in a Western democratic perspective, this is perfectly normal, but this activity is actually a crime in Hong Kong now.
Yes, Ross Feingold, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to speak to you here on NewsX World. We now move on and over to Japan for our next story, where Prime Minister Tsunai Takaichi held her first phone call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, pledging continued support for Ukraine in its war against Russia. Takaichi reaffirmed Japan's commitment to helping Ukraine's recovery, reconstruction and pursuit of a just peace, while Zelensky thanked Japan for its ongoing aid. Both leaders agreed to strengthen cooperation on security and development. Zelensky expressed gratitude for Japan's assistance in energy infrastructure to help Ukrainians through the winter. Later, Takaichi also spoke with Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, agreeing to deepen bilateral and multilateral cooperation to promote a free and stable international order. Moving on now, and Typhoon Kalaigme has killed at least 140 people and left 127 missing after unleashing devastating flooding across the central Philippines as the storm has headed towards Vietnam. Floodwaters are described as unprecedented, rushed through the Cebu province's towns and cities, sweeping away cars, riverside shanties, and even massive shipping containers. The National Civil Defense has reported 114 deaths, as this count did not include an additional 28 reported by Cebu provincial authorities. Meanwhile, in Lilion, a town near Cebu City, where 35 bodies have been recovered from flooded areas. And that's a wrap on the China Report today. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.